Hi, and welcome to the Brohoyo podcast, the podcast about gacha in general and Hoyoverse games in specific. I'm your host, Steven, and this is my co host, David.
Hey, everyone.
And this week, Dave and I are going to discuss sustain characters in Hoyoverse games. So, to start out, I'm going to really quickly define sustain characters as any character whose primary role on the team is to keep the team alive, to prevent, characters on that team from dying. So that is the definition we will be using going forward. There are a couple edge case characters, but for the purposes of this discussion, we're talking about tanks, shielders, healers, etc., etc. If a character heals themselves, that doesn't count. It's only if they focus on keeping the team alive. With that said, I'm going to just kind of jump right in, if that's okay with you, Dave.
Yeah, go for it. Let's hear what your thoughts are.
Okay. So I've broken this down into three general arguments, with the idea being that I think that there's a value issue with sustains. I think that sustains as a role are fine. Fine being the key term there. I'm a Kokomi main. I like sustained characters. Dave, you're a Zhongli main, kind of, sort of. Like, he's your go-to sustain. So it's not that sustains are weak, but I think they have some core problems that Hoyoverse kind of doesn't quite know how to deal with them. So jumping right in, I'm going to go into my first thesis, my first argument, which is
And before you do, I do want to clarify that this is going to be these 3 points that you're about to make. These are going to be the first time that I'm hearing them, so I'm essentially going to be live reacting. These are going to be my gut knee-jerk reactions to you, and so I may agree with you on some, I may disagree with you on some, and I would say it probably makes for a more interesting conversation if I disagree with you on them, but we'll find out exactly what it is. But I just wanted that caveat in there that I do not know what you're about to tell me as far as your 3 points.
Good point. I am springing this on Dave. So yeah, I'm just going to jump right in. So the first is that one of the problems that sustains have in Hoyoverse games is that Hoyoverse games are casual in nature. Survivability is typically not a major issue in any of their games. For example, Genshin allows skillful players to dodge attacks using invulnerability frames from ults. Honkai, you are going to take damage in that because it is a turn-based game, but the challenge level for it is really built around 4-star sustains being viable. They might not be comfortable, they might not be perfect, but you can complete all content with a 4-star sustain being what you have on your team. So that really kind of limits the numbers check that you get for incoming damage. As a result, enemy health bars tend to be how power creep is inserted into the game, or effects like that. You don't typically see changes to how much damage the team is taking, except for a few caveats, the big one being the wolves in Genshin, who have the ability to hit through shields, which exist entirely because Zhongli completely negated.
Yeah, it's really anyway.
Zhongli completely negated the need for anything else, so they had to do something in order to make sustains at least partially viable in Genshin. But that's sort of my first statement. It's the shortest of them, but it's important for the ones that come. So I wanted to set that as sort of a groundwork going in. So Dave, your thoughts?
Okay, so to react to that, so the main point of your argument there is essentially that they all kind of do the same thing, but that the game is easy enough that you're never in dire need to necessarily have more healing. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, basically the idea is that they're, unlike with DPS checks that we run into in Genshin and Honkai and so on and so forth, there's not really a incoming damage check that goes up significantly. That the games are designed so that you can complete them with Barbara, you can complete them with Natasha, you can do all of the challenges. It might be tougher. There's an ease side of it, but in general, you can basically complete I'm going to say 99% of the content of the game with the sustained character that they give you at some point in the story.
Okay, so I guess a couple points, I think, which I'm in a little bit of agreement, but I also kind of disagree to an extent. So we'll start with kind of where I agree, and that's in terms of the difficulty and the challenging mode, specifically when it comes to Genshin Impact. There's just not really too much challenging end game content in Genshin because it is designed to be a more inviting game and be very casual friendly, and the draw to that is the characters, their personality, and the exploration. I can see where you're coming from and agree to that to an extent. Where I would push back a little bit is you talk about things being able to be completed with the 4-star sustains and that it may be a little harder, but it is still doable. And in that argument, I mean, it's kind of, basically what the character would lack in power because they're a 4-star, you would then need to ultimately make up maybe with some of your artifacts and have more or better artifact stats in that regard. You kind of have to compensate in that regards. Whereas maybe with a 5-star sustain, you may have, they may be a little bit more powerful in the power spike in the character unit itself, to where having less than ideal substats or less than good rolls on the substats, makes that content a little bit uh less challenging in that regards. Now the other thing too that I would say is completing content is one thing, but for some completing it isn't enough. Like for me, I want to 3-star something, and if I'm not 3-starring something, it just feels incomplete. I actually hate seeing like the 1 or 2 stars on something. It drives me nuts. And I would say that yes, while it is possible to do it with a 4-star team, it's been done with 4-star teams. Um, I feel like you have to have a little bit more of a min-max approach in those senses than if you did have that 5-star unit with those same artifacts or maybe those same weapons. And then specifically, and then as far as kind of Genshin is concerned, and then when we jump over to Star Rail, Honkai Star Rail I think does have a bit more challenging end game stuff. Um,
I would agree with that. That there is
and
definitely a
now
greater challenge there.
and I'm not, and this is all relative, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not saying that this is Dark Souls or Souls like content where you're banging your head against the wall for hours, then you beat a boss and you're like, yay, this is fun. No, it's not like that, but relative to Genshin, Star Rail would be more difficult. And to that effect, again, being able to finish something in the turn cycle or get the point requirement needed to 3-star things, have using Natasha, versus using well, even Gallagher's the one 4-cost unit that's top tier, but that's because of a lot of other things he enables. But usually, you have your 5-star sustain units. Ho-Oh's kind of in a lot of popular team comps. Probably the first one that comes to mind, Luocha, when he came out, was kind of the go-to. He's maybe fallen off a little bit, but I would say it's more important in Star Rail than it is in Genshin. But for the most part, I kind of agree with what you're saying with some of those just handful of caveats.
Fair enough. And again, I don't disagree with a lot of those, but I will be addressing some of those points a little bit later. Maybe not to everyone's satisfaction, but at least to mine. So,
And that's what matters.
exactly. So for the second point, it's that really players only need 2 sustain units, and that's because most content in Genshin and Honkai, you use 2 teams. So as long as you have 2 sustain units to fill that slot for both teams, you functionally have completed that role. And this pulls off of the casual argument earlier, that because there's not a forced scaling, once you have 2 sustains, 2 5-star sustains, you don't need to necessarily shop around that much unless you're looking for something else very specific. It's also worth noting that very few sustains are actually released. Some real rough numbers here, just me counting on some web pages earlier. Genshin has released 5 to 6 sustain characters, depending on how you define them. Like Deha technically has a shielding, tanking, support part of her kit. I don't know if I would really count her as a sustain, but on the off chance, I stuck her in there. Um, and that's out of 88 total characters. Of those, 46 of them are 5 stars. So 5 to 6-ish sustain characters out of 46 total 5 stars. It's a tiny chunk, all things considered. Honkai Star Rail has released only 5 5-star sustains. There are 4 4 stars, so a total of 9 out of 56 characters. 32 of all of the 56 characters in Honkai Star Rail are 5 stars. So again, there's more of them in Honkai, but it also requires there to be a little bit more of that available, just because, again, you can't dodge and you can't use skill in order to avoid damage the same way you can in Genshin. It's also worth noting that sustains, because their primary purpose is to keep a party up, the percentage of damage that they provide to their team is typically lower than what you would get from the other 3 slots: your DPS, your sub DPS, your sustain, or not, your sub DPS, or your support. There we go. I'm going to make that mistake all over this podcast. I do apologize, people. I'm going to freely switch support and sustain occasionally, so I do apologize, but I will try to stick to it. Those other 3 roles, those other 3 slots on your team are going to be where the bulk of your damage comes from, and your sustain slot is literally just there to keep everybody above 1 HP. Keep them from dying. That's the only job they have. Any additional bonuses that they provide are nice, but if you really look at a lot of teams, it's really 3 characters and the best sustain that you can have. Now, I don't have numbers for this, so I cannot go in and pull out theory-crafted numbers of what's the difference between running Adventurine in a full support or a full follow-up attack team versus running Fushuan or Locha or whoever. But for the most part, those teams work on 3 character slots and a sustain. I'm not arguing that there aren't best-in-slot sustains. They clearly exist. It's just opportunity cost-wise. Is it worth spending potentially 180 pools for 5%, 10% damage increase versus a whole new team? It's sort of the argument that I would make. I have a example that I will use afterwards, or a reference I'll use afterwards after you give your opinion, Dave, but I didn't want to do it too early because it kind of just kills the argument. But anyways.
So your second point here, just so I can kind of, strongman or Iron Man this argument, which basically, repeat it so I can understand. For those that are not unfamiliar with that term, when you steel man an argument, I'm repeating what he said to verify I understand his actual argument, as opposed to the opposite that would be to straw man, right? So to steel man your argument, you're essentially saying 2 sustains is all any account really ever needs for 2 team type content. And while yes, there could be a more efficient healer maybe for your team, like you said, as far as throwing resources into a new character, is it worth that to build that one up for that 5 to 10% increase, as opposed to just going with a different team format? Is that a fair assessment of what you're saying?
Basically, I do think I'll use my metaphor here.
Okay.
So, both Dave and I do football together. We're in the same fantasy football league. Those of you out there who listen and do that as well, you'll get this. If not, I apologize. This might not work. But when you're drafting in fantasy, you don't necessarily draft for who is going to score you the most points on your team. You draft for opportunity cost. Your quarterback is probably going to earn you more points than other positions on your team, but the actual difference between a top-tier quarterback and a mid-tier quarterback are lower than a top-tier running back, top-tier receiver, etc., and a mid-tier one. So it's more important to get a high-value running back and wide receiver because the gap there is larger than it is to get a top-tier quarterback. I believe I'm getting my information correct there, Dave.
Yeah, so the argument you're making
Yeah,
effectively is
even
elaborate with that.
cost.
Yeah, so the value that you're getting essentially with so while a quarterback, yeah, is going to ultimately maybe score you more points in a given season, the fall off between that first tier or second tier of quarterback isn't as great as the fall off between the first tier running backs and the second tier running backs. Correct. So therefore, that's why in most fantasy leagues, running backs tend to go first. So a little bit of insight for those that don't participate in that fantasy football aspect, and for those that do, maybe it's a strategy you've considered right in the past. So I would say, as far as kind of only having two sustains and that being all you ever need, I would kind of push back on that. So for a couple things, and I guess to even go back a little bit further to talk about content and the ease of the content, I kind of thinking about this, and as far as like a player base and player engagement, can you imagine like the fall off in player retention you would have if you couldn't complete like the basic like the basic challenges at 1 star? Like if you can complete those with the basic characters you have or a newer account, the bar for entry into the game would be so much higher. So I think that's partly why maybe they do that, and make it possible to at least complete some of these challenges with the basic characters, because they understand if we're going to want to engage and retain new players, we have to make them at least be able to do some of these events and be successful, even if it's just 1 starring or 2 starring a particular stage. Um, so I guess I kind of get that now that I've really kind of am thinking about why some of these events are so easy. Now, as far as another point you made that I kind of wanted to hone in on, and this is more of a factor in Genshin than it is in Star Rail, but you mentioned a healer's only job is to keep the team alive, and that's not necessarily true. Again, more in Genshin than Star Rail, and that would be in terms of elemental interactions and then team elemental resonance.
Yep.
So that's something to where maybe, yeah, you're wanting to try out a fire DPS character in Genshin, and having, an ice healer like Chi-Chi, let's say, right?
Mhm.
May be nice. I know it's not ideal, but like just for the elemental interaction, because you have that melt team, right? With cryo and fire. Um, but alternatively, instead of using Chi-Chi, you could use a fire healer like uh, Bennett, right? Who heals, but also provides you with that team. Since you're using 2 pyros, you get, the team gets bonus attack. And so that's where maybe taking that factor into consideration, subbing out a healer for a different healer because it fits the elemental role, or it fits that, whether it be because of the reaction or the resonance, that would maybe be worth it, because not only are you spiking, from the character's abilities themselves, but also passive things within the team, or again, the elemental reaction that your DPS's damage is based around.
See, you keep jumping ahead, Dave. You're getting to points that I'm going to be making here in the future. So, okay,
Well,
I will be responding.
that's
I know,
just what
I know.
that's just okay. Okay.
You're good.
So that would kind of be my pushback on that. But as far as like that argument for Star Rail, that doesn't really hold any water, because there's not elemental reactions, there's not team resonance in Star Rail. It's just breaking toughness and applying weaknesses and such.
Any other thoughts or?
No, but you said I jumped ahead, so I didn't want to drag too on if I've already made your third point.
No, no, no. Well, my third point is kind of addressing that, which is that based off of the previous two, like again, this is all meant to kind of build on each other. So based on the fact that the game is designed to be somewhat easy to survive for good reasons. Again, I'm not necessarily saying Hoyoverse is wrong for this. It's just that there's knock-on consequences as a result of it. Um, and the fact that the support role tends to be very limited, and you're only going to really need 2 technically. What you end up getting is the actual sustain portion of most sustain units kits is kind of perfunctory. It's there to make sure that you can hit the minimum required, and anything else in the power budget that a character might have. And when I guess just to define, power budget here would be if you're allocating value within a unit, they might have 40% of their skills and stats and so forth dedicated to healing, and then the other 60% to damage or support or what have you. And that's sort of how they break up and build the character, is what portion of this kit is going to take up how much of what they do. As an example from last week, Fei Zhao is a lot of her power budget is put into her ultimate because she's expected to ult a lot in order to do her damage. So in this case, if you're putting a lot of the power budget in sustain, that means that you're probably going to be over healing a lot. They're really dedicated. Most of their kit is dedicated to the idea of healing. Kokomi would be a great example of this with her negative 100% crit rate, but she gets a bunch of bonuses to healing. Anyways, sorry for that tangent.
Oh no, to continue the tangent and make another analogy of power budget, we can even bring in examples from like another game. So a game like Overwatch, you have healers in there like Mercy, or you had back when I played, I was a Moira main, right? Who had a lot of damage output as well as healing, but not really ever as much as say Mercy could heal for, or if you were a really good Ana player. But Ana mains are nutty anyway.
True.
But yeah, so that's kind of another example to bring in maybe another games universe to make more sense if people remember playing Overwatch.
Yeah, and so what this means is that for a lot of sustain characters, that the actual sustain portion of their kit, in order for them to be meta, or in at least the theory crafters, the community's eyes, you kind of want the actual sustain portion to be as minimal as possible, so as much of the rest of the power budget can go to doing something else, to basically turn your sustain slot on your team into a hybrid slot of hybrid sustain and something else. It's one of the things that gets brought up a lot with Lucha, with Kiki, with Bailu, etc., or Chi-Chi, Bailu, etc., is that their big problem is that so much of their kit is dedicated to actually healing that they kind of overheal. And again, overhealing is something that if you play MMOs, you're well aware of, that you're basically overspending resources on something that you're very rarely going to actually need. Being able to heal for 15,000 health sounds great in Genshin, or not Genshin, in Honkai, but when max health is typically floating around 5,000, that extra 10,000 health that you're healing doesn't do anything. It's not really helpful. So having those big, massive numbers don't mean anything, because functionally it might as well just be heal character to full. And instead what you would rather have is probably something where it's like, heal him for 5,000, heal him for 6,000, and then let the rest of that power budget go to something else. And as an example of this, a lot of the best sustain units are actually hybrid support and sustains, that they don't really necessarily focus 100% of their kit on sustaining. They're more about the other stuff that they do. So Bennett with his attack buff, Zhongli with his defense shred, his stun on his ult, his utility that he brings. Kokomi is considered good mainly because of her Hydro application, which is, again, something you brought up in the previous one, where you bring these sustains for these side benefits, not for actually keeping characters alive, so on and so forth. Again, other examples, Ho-Oh, Adventurine, or Ho-Ho, I guess. I always call her Ho-Oh for whatever reason. Whereas the
Emon on the brain, it's fine.
Yeah. Whereas, most of the worst examples, as I brought up, are, Kiki, who really only has healing as her thing. Now, she has other issues with, like, poor energy generation and so on and so forth, but one of the big critiques is that she basically only does healing. Bailu only really does healing. So you're into this situation where basically your best sustains are going to be, again, sustain support hybrids, or they provide a battery for the team. They either provide it through energy, through hydro, or through elemental application, through SP generation in Honkai. That's part of what made Lucha look good, is the fact that he's very low SP. He doesn't eat up a lot of SP, which frees it up for the rest of the team. Things like that. So you end up with kits where you're functionally really bringing a support half sustain. You're not really bringing a sustain unit. Not end of the world, but it does lead to this weird place where, again, you only ever really need two. If you can get one, all the rest are kind of interchangeable. and you're really playing for like minor buffs, minor tweaks. They're, again, they might be more comfortable, but as long as they're not actively harming your team in the same way that a Nihlu team, which is, the Hyperbloom team, I think is the term, or Overbloom, whatever it is, where you have to have only Hydro, only Dendro. Throwing Toma in there, throwing Zhongli in there, actively hurts that team. But as long as you have a Hydro or Dendro healer on it, you're basically good. There's a best in slot, but you really only need a Hydro or Dendro on there. On a freeze team, you don't want to be throwing in Bennett necessarily, because he's going to start applying pyro to all of your frozen people and causing melt reactions. Like, things like that will cause tension and issues, but for the most part, you can kind of get away with a very small amount of sustain units, and as a result, Genshin doesn't release a lot of sustain units, so there's not a lot of demand for them. It kind of becomes its own self-fulfilling cycle, I guess, is my view on it. But having said that, Dave.
Well, and I think too, another perspective to look at, right, is what is going to be the more attractive unit in terms of what's going to maybe sell more, what's going to be more popular, right? So if you're a sports fan, there's a few of us that can appreciate, like in baseball, you can appreciate a no-hitter, you can definitely appreciate a perfect game. And if you like football, there's the old adage of defense wins championships, and I would say there are some that can appreciate a good defensive game and like sound defense being played. Same thing with NBA basketball. But a bulk of the fan base, like a vast majority across all of those sports, like offense, right? We like seeing touchdowns scored. We like seeing 3-pointers made. We like seeing home runs hit, right? So for this analogy, just kind of bring it back to Genshin and Star Rail, people like seeing big numbers, right? So with having bigger and better numbers, like those types of units are going to sell better or sell more. And so I think that's also probably another factor that goes into why there aren't that many different variety, as it were, of sustained characters, because like I said, their job is pretty straightforward, and it's not sexy in terms of sales. Like healing isn't sexy when we want to show off our biggest damage numbers, right? People aren't taking screenshots of how big of a heal they hit. They're taking screenshots of how big of a damage number did I just do to this boss, or how many look at this screenshot of me zero cycling in Star Rail, right? So you're not gonna zero cycle with bigger heals. You'll beat it, as we've alluded to. It may be a 1-star clear, but you will beat it. And so I think that is also maybe a factor in it as well, is that just to the vast majority of people, defense, healing, it's not sexy. What is sexy? Dealing the big damage. That's why, like any MOBA you play, right? What do you always, whenever you queue up and you're queuing up in a role, the two roles that take the longest to find are healers and tanks, right? DPSs, those slots are always full because everybody loves doing the big number damage, but nobody loves to necessarily do the healing and the tanking, right? The nitty gritty of it. So I think that's a factor in it. But to your point, with some certain circumstances, and I think really it leans more towards those that are more hardcore into the game and wanting to try and do the zero cycles. When you talk about, is it worth getting another healer for that 5 to 10% boost because they synergize a little bit better? I think that's where that comes in. It's those, for the casual player who's gonna have the casual approach and just kind of in it having fun, and getting through the story and just doing the events or whatever. They're to collect the units. Yeah, any 2 healers are gonna be fine. They're gonna be serviceable, get you through it. But for those that are min-maxing and trying to just grind out and make the runs as efficient as possible, or do the Abyss in Genshin as quickly as possible, right, in the shortest period of time, that's where I think that's going to come through. So I'd almost make the case that having so little sustains is okay for the casual player, but for those that are looking to push and looking to min-max, you want to have a roster of different supports, because an extra 5 to 10% can be the difference between zero cycling or not, 3-starring that 12th level of the Abyss or not. So I find myself kind of in the middle of that. I wouldn't say I'm super casual, but I also wouldn't say I'm, min-maxing to the point where I'm trying to zero cycle. And then also, I know for some, because this is the case for me, I get Hoyoverse does a great job with characters and backstories and their aesthetic and their personality. So that plays a factor in a character for me as well.
Yeah, and again, I'm not. I guess what this was sort of more of a thought experiment, which is I was sitting down and especially with Ling Sha, I believe is the character that's coming out next, who's a um,
Oh,
preservation.
in Star Rail,
Yeah, in
yes.
Star Rail, who's a preservation character, and I was thinking about in Genshin, again, sort of just the kind of low number of sustains that we see, and what might be leading to it, what might be kind of some of the issues that I'm seeing with them as a class, and why might we not be getting as many of them as we maybe could. I do think that there are healer archetypes out there that Hoyoverse hasn't really explored, for sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for ones I'm kind of going like, that would be neat to have. But just in general, it feels like in comparison to potentially other games, you don't really see that the sustain as an archetype in the same way. Like tanking isn't as much of a thing, and so on and so forth. So why might that be? Again, I don't think sustains are bad. I just kind of feel like they're maybe a little bit too interchangeable, and that due to wanting to keep the games open and available to everybody, which is fine, it's great. I have no problem with that. It does also mean that there's sort of a knock-on effect where survivability and the ability to keep your team alive tends to be a non-issue, and so you're left in this weird space where you basically have teams that are 3 slots and then chuck in whatever in order for them to work. And I don't know. I think that's a little bit sad. I personally like tanky characters, sustained characters. I would like more interactions there, but I get why they're not devoting energy to that. And then as a semi free to play player, I also don't necessarily hate it because it means that whenever a banner comes up, pretty much going forward, that is a sustained character, it automatically just becomes a skip unless you're a new character or a new player. So there are advantages here. Just I don't know. It seemed a little bit sad.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think for the bolt going in, like I said, going in blind, kind of hearing, listening to your thought process on the topic, I agree with a lot of the points. But as with everything, there's no blanket statement for for as far as all or never type stuff, right? So there's obviously going to be those different caveats, which I think we dove into a little bit. But maybe somebody else has a different perspective. Be sure to let us know down below. But we do want to shift to talk about. We're going to stay in the Hoyoverse world because we do have a new character release as well as some other news that Hoyoverse is doing. So let's. I guess first we'll jump into the new character there. So looking at Genshin, this past week, we just had new character release Niche, and so we were introduced to him in the early story here when we came into Natlan. And Steve, I'll let you kind of break down who he is, what he does, and what's going on with that.
Yeah, no problem. So Kanish is a Dintro Claymore user. He is a Sumeru, not Sumeru. He's a Natlan character, and you're gonna build him basically like a standard DPS. Just to really quickly jump in, his E is the little grappling hook that you use as the dinosaur. And if you hit an enemy with it, he tethers onto the enemy, and you can basically surf. You can strafe left or right around the enemy, doing damage to them. Doing a shooting attack to them. And then his ult, he summons his little pixel dragon that fires a Godzilla beam to kill stuff or to deal damage. His best weapons are his signature weapon, a Fang of the Mountain King. But if you are looking for free-to-play options, his best replacement weapons are going to be Serpent Spine or Earthshaker, are his 4-star options. As far as 5-star, they're all stat sticks from that point forward. His best artifact sets are Obsidian Codex, 4 Obsidian Codex or 4 Unfinished Reverie. Obsidian Codex is I believe it's a newer set that has come out in Natlan, where the two-piece is while the equipping character is in their Night Soul Blessing and is on the field, their damage increases, and then the four pieces after the equipped character consumes one Night Soul point while on the field, their crit rate increases. And then I believe Unfinished Reverie is a Fontaine. Yeah, that one's a burning build as well. So two pieces attack. The four piece buffs burning. We mentioned it back when the young lady Emile, I believe, that came out. Regardless, as far as artifact main stats go, you're going to want attack sands, dendro, damage goblet, and then crit of some assortment circlet. Substats are the standard crit damage, crit rate, attack, energy recharge, and energy elemental mastery to spice. So that is Kanish. I do want to really quickly, though, kind of point out a concern where it seems like the first three characters that we've gotten have all just been we take the elemental power of the dinosaurs and give them to characters. I am curious to see what's going to happen going forward with that, because his E literally is just the little Dendro dinosaurs hook shot ability. So I'm curious to see what they're going to do moving forward for the upcoming characters.
New dinos,
but the next character that they've announced is a Geo, so it's going to be a repeat of Kachina. So kind of curious on that one. Yeah. Regardless, though, that is that's all.
Speculation for another day. Yeah. Speculation for another day. What other news do we have going on with Hoyoverse?
We do have other news. For those listening, we also skipped over events because nothing's happening event-wise in either Honkai or Genshin. So we are skipping the event section. Instead, we are going to just a straight Hoyoverse news. The first piece of news is the McDonald's collab with Genshin. In order to, if you are not aware of these sort of events, a lot of times gacha companies will team up with fast food providers or real-world restaurant companies in order to provide in-game benefits if you buy certain things from them. In this case, there are two options on what you can get. If you purchase a chicken sandwich meal with I believe it's an apple pie, you get a wind glider and background, one of the banners, for your account. And then if you get just an apple pie, you get some primos, and I think it's like 60, 70 primos, something like that. I don't even think it's a full
a recipe as well.
Yeah, a recipe for the the apple pie.
That's right.
In order to claim it, you will have to order it through the McDonald's app. And then you will get a code that you can then enter through the usual code website that we use for Genshin. The other major piece of news is Honkai Impact 3rd and Honkai Star Rail are having a collab. It is a one-way collab. It is Honkai Star Rail appearing in Honkai Impact 3rd. We are not getting Honkai Impact 3rd in Star Rail. Just the one way. Yeah, a little disappointing, but you know what? Honkai's getting Fate Stay Night here next year, so maybe I'll
in the right direction. I was thinking about Genshin. I saw that McDonald's collab, and they'd previously done one with KFC, but it wasn't stateside. So I was happy to see that we finally got it stateside. Though I wish we could just get it from ordering any number of things through the app, because I don't really like their pies, and I just want my nuggets. But anyway, anything else, Steve? What else we got?
No. At this point, I believe that is all I have, and we are good to do other gacha news.
All right, well, let's jump outside of the Hoyoverse world into the other worlds of gacha. So three topics I wanted to talk about that was kind of news that came out this past week. The first one, real quickly, is Reverse 1999. That gacha game's been out for a healthy bit now, but it was announced this week that they are going to be getting a Steam client. So if you are interested in trying that game out, or your storage capacities on your phone are limited, right, and this gives you another option. Now, I don't know if it's going to be able to, I would imagine you can bring your account over similar to other mobile games like Nikkei and stuff that have the mobile, or gosh, similar to Genshin, similar to Star Rail that you can log in. Or is it going to be something where it's a separate server and you're starting fresh, similar to what Brave 9 did when they came out with their Steam client? But anyway, again, reverse 1999, getting a Steam client. So if you're interested in trying that out or would rather play it on a computer rather than the phone, that option will be available to you in the near future. Other news, speaking of Brave 9, Brown Dust 2, they just announced that they are doing a collaboration starting the first week of October. October 2nd, I believe, is when it'll go live. And it's with the game universe of Senran Kagura, which was, I think, first came out back in early 2000s on the Nintendo, I want to say. I'll be honest, I don't know much about the franchise, but what little I do know, essentially, it was based around maybe different schools of shinobi, like girl shinobi types, ninja types. And from what they've released, the trailer for the collaboration, their art style is fitting right in with what Brown Dust 2 does in terms of some of skill cutscenes and everything like that. So it will be ultimately 4 characters. So it's going to be 4 separate units are going to be there, one of which is going to be given away for free. And then you can actually +5 it, which is the max you can go by doing some very basic, simple missions. But the other 3 will also be having banners to pull for. So it is recommended if you're playing the game to go ahead and, hopefully you've been saving up, but to continue saving up, as that is going to again be starting October 2nd and be hitting you with, again, 4 characters. So one of which you'll get for free, but that's still ultimately 3 characters you're pulling for. And then also outside of the collab, I think they're also going to be introducing a new skin for Nebris, who is a character from within the Brown Dust universe, who had a summer bathing suit skin. That was actually her first skin that came out, but they're going to release another skin for her. I can't remember if it's before or after the collab. So just kind of bear that in mind, that we're about to have a lot of banners in very quick succession. So budget accordingly if you are free to play. Though shout out to Brown Dust 2 for being pretty free to play friendly in terms of how many pulls they give per patch. The last bit of news that I wanted to talk about, which was, it's probably the biggest news for me, would be Nikkei just launched a new event. They released a new character this past week, the character Rouge. So she made her first appearance in the Lucky 777 side event story. That was back when the Bunny Twins came out. So that was 6+ months ago. So she's finally released from NPC jail, and is going to become a playable, pullable character. She is a Burst 1 character who's a supporter, who is the electric element with a sniper rifle. And shocker, she's in the Tetra faction, yet another Tetra unit in Nikkei. She actually introduces a new mechanic to the game in terms of positioning. So whereas before, positioning didn't matter too much, just in terms of like order if you were playing auto playing, she is introducing the concept of front row versus back row in terms of one of her abilities proc a certain thing to happen. I haven't read her notes yet, but I do know that it introduces that game mechanic. Now, also with this past patch that they just did, some other new things that came out, some quality of life stuff. If you're interested, for the lobby, whereas previously you could have 5, different cutscenes or images, but you would only have like the one song playing, you can now assign a song from the jukebox to each different lobby screen. So again, you can have up to 5 lobby screens, and you can have up to 5 songs, right? One for each lobby screen. So small little fun thing there. They've also kind of how the advice page works. So this is basically the building up your relationship with your Nikkeis for passive bonuses and premium currency. They've reorganized that, made it a lot easier to navigate, as well as kind of track which conversations you've had with them already, which is kind of nice. The other big thing that came out was the popularity contest, the second one that they did about 2 months ago or so when Red Hood won. They released the free skin for Red Hood, so all you have to do is log in to obtain that skin. It comes with its own voice lines. It has its own unique skill cutscene, and Shift Up did good with this one. This was the skin I voted for. Unlike the first popularity contest, the skin that won was not the one I voted for. This was the skin I voted for. And they did a really good job with it. It looks great. With it also comes a side story. So it's about 6 or 7 side missions to kind of get some more backstory. If you're into the lore of the game, you can kind of get a little bit more about some of the Nikke's personalities and the history for specifically Red Hood. And then the other thing that they do with this did with this patch is in the they call it the Nickopedia, but basically, you know, it's any game's collection tab or the encyclopedia of the characters. While not released yet, they did bring in, it looks like 2 new characters are going to be coming very shortly. One is going to be named Phantom, who basically, if you like the aesthetic of Persona 5, this is the character for you. That's the best way to let. She looks a lot like Joker from Persona 5. But based off of what we know from her, she's going to be a Burst 3 attacker class who's an assault rifle with a water element in the Elysian manufacturer. So, yay, not a Tetra unit for once, but actual Elysian and a Burst 3 nonetheless, which Elysian has desperately been in need of. And then the other character that is in the Nickopedia currently, which has been teased, is Quincy, the Escape Queen. So for those of you that play the game, you know Quincy is a character that was already in the game. She was a rehabilitation unit you could get for free over the course of 30 days. But this skin is an alternate skin, similar to how they have D, and then they have D Killer Wife, or they have Ludmilla, and then Ludmilla, the Hot Springs Ludmilla one. This is similar concept. So it's Quincy Escape Queen, who looks like she is going to be from the Missileless manufacturer, also a Burst 3, but with a SMG. So we'll be interested to learn more about those two and when they're coming out, what their timetable looks like. And then as far as other things in the Nickopedia, real quick to wrap it up, Miranda looks like she is getting a skin that's going to be included in next month's Battle Pass. So this is going to be, I believe, like the $15 or $20 Battle Passes. You complete it, you get to the last tier of the Battle Pass, you get skin unlocked. So Miranda's Thief of Justice skin will be included there. It looks, again, same kind of aesthetic as Persona 5, similar to what Phantom looks like. And then the other skin that is in there is for Tova, which is just simply called Baseball Fan. It's literally her, looks like in a baseball uniform. So the baseball pants, the baseball top, and a baseball cap, and then she has a baseball bat. It's pretty cute. So if you like that character, that's going to be coming down the road. I don't know how they're going to be introducing that one to us, but it is on the horizon. So that's going to kind of be it for my other gotcha news. We do want to thank you guys for joining us this week. You can let us know down below what your thoughts on sustained characters are, or maybe any theories that you have as to why we haven't seen too many, or why we need to see more, or maybe you have some ideas for a type of sustain you'd like to see in game. If you enjoyed the episode and you'd like to show your support, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the channel. You can email us at brohoyopod@gmail.com with questions or suggestions for the show. We also have a link to our Discord in the description, so be sure to join us over there for news, game nights, and content notifications. And you can join us next week when we discuss the DPS dilemma in Hoyoverse's games. But until then, keep gaming.
We made a choice, go fight against your fate.